Greetings everyone, good afternoon. Mike Bush is my name. In February this year, my review panel and I were tasked by Mayor Wayne Brown to undertake an independent rapid review of Auckland Council's emergency management response over the first 48 hours of the anniversary holiday weekend flooding event. Over the 48-hour period beginning Friday 27 January 2023, Auckland experienced a widespread flood event involving significant transport and infrastructure disruption, mass evacuations, and loss of life and property. And I would like to just pause for a moment to acknowledge the people who lost their lives that evening, people who were seriously injured, their family and whānau. This unprecedented event unfolded with extraordinary speed. Minutes mattered. From the time Auckland Council Emergency Management stood up an incident team at 4:30 p.m. on that Friday to the end of that team's first virtual meeting at 6:15 p.m, much of the damage was done. The later declaration of emergency, establishment of evacuation centres and related public messaging came too late to provide Aucklanders with timely public safety advice, reassurance and safe havens. This flooding event has offered critical insights for the future management and leadership of complex and unpredictable emergencies in New Zealand's super city and beyond. As reviewers, we were tasked by the Mayor of Auckland to undertake an independent, rapid review of 4 dimensions of Auckland Council's emergency management response over the first 48 hours of this event. Those 4 dimensions were, firstly, the performance of Auckland emergency management and emergency services, the declaration of the state of emergency, communications with partner agencies, central government, elected members, and of course, the public. Decision-making, procedures, and communication templates. We did so by reviewing relevant records and interviewing those who had roles to play on that Friday and over the weekend that followed. The team also reviewed video recordings of every incident management team meeting. There were 6 recordings of approximately 1 hour each. This review was an exercise to determine how well the system operated under the extreme stress of the initial response stages of this flood event. It was not a formal or forensic investigation. The lessons are as follows. Auckland Council's emergency management systems, its operating model and the relevant plans, policies and procedures was not prepared for an event of this magnitude or speed. Gaps in preparedness, including for flood and superstorm emergencies, were known to key council decision makers in advance. At the time of this flood event, they remained work in progress. Relationship and communication protocols between the key players at Auckland Council with CDEM roles, including the Mayor, Chair of the Council's CDEM Committee, Chief Executive and Emergency Management staff, were not sufficiently inclusive in the critical early stages of this event. Senior leaders underestimated the importance of their visible leadership, which had an adverse effect on communications and public confidence. The Council's emergency management team appeared to lack the command, crisis leadership skills and operational experience to deal with an event of this complexity. Critical council emergency management roles and delegations were unclear, both within the council and to partner response agencies. The crisis exposed weaknesses in the council's emergency management systems, community tangata whenua relationships, which slowed the response and led to an inadequate and early intelligence to support public safety information and decision making. Rather than a model based on central planning and localised delivery, the Council's emergency response was premised largely on centralised coordination and delivery of response. This weakened the localised intelligence flows that could have supported better targeted community responses. These problems aligned to create system deficiencies, particularly in the initial 12 hours. Aucklanders did not receive the timely communications, leadership and practical support they had the right to expect in a crisis of this magnitude. Many of these problems were known in advance, which is troubling. From 2016 onwards, the Council's Auckland CDEM group plan recognised the issues that Auckland faced as a result of infrequent testing and lack of understanding of its emergency response frameworks. The plan raised the concern that Auckland's capability to respond to a large-scale or widespread event, such as occurred on 27 to 29 January, had not been tested, and that operational emergency management plans were not sufficient. The need to develop specific contingency plans for flood and superstorm events was also identified. Yet by the time of this event, some of the key issues that had been identified had not been actioned by the Council's executive. Nor does it appear that the CDEM committee demanded that they be prioritised and actioned. In 2018, a small report into earlier weather events made a number of related recommendations, which also do not appear to have been fully implemented. Our report suggests several specific areas in which the operating model for Auckland emergency management can be improved. Most importantly, however, the issues of leadership exposed by this crisis must be addressed. Key leaders in Auckland Council failed to appreciate the vital importance of visible leadership and frequent public communication during a time of crisis. Effective leadership in a crisis goes directly to public confidence in elected leaders and thus to the overall health of our democratic institutions. Within Auckland Council, there was an opportunity for better advice and support to the Mayor's office both before and during the event by the Chief Executive and his officials to provide leadership information and assurance to the public during emergencies. During the weather emergency, the Mayor and his team should also have been more active in demanding information and asking questions of the Chief Executive, his officials and the emergency management team. All those in key roles needed to view and react to the developing emergency through both a strategic leadership and tactical response lens. Doing so may well have resulted in an earlier declaration of emergency. As the night of Friday, January 27 unfolded, Aucklanders expected and needed clear and regular messaging, delivered with empathy via multiple channels to understand the seriousness of the event, to know where to go and how to get help, and to gain assurance that the crisis was being actively managed by their elected and professional leaders. The timing of the declaration of emergency was another topic of our review. We're confident that the Mayor issued a declaration of emergency immediately after he was advised it was requested by emergency services. However, we consider that the request for an emergency declaration could and should have been made earlier in the evening. I do need to be clear on this point, as there are some public misconceptions about the significance of a declaration. An earlier declaration of emergency would not have directly affected the operational response from emergency services on the night, given they were already fully deployed and responding to the event, and had communicated that they did not require any emergency powers at that point. However, in our view, an earlier declaration during daylight hours, accompanied by an emergency text alert, would have assisted the operational response and increased public safety by ensuring that Aucklanders understood the seriousness of the event. A problem was that Auckland emergency management lacked sufficient situational awareness about what was happening on the ground, and so in turn were not able to advise the Mayor about the circumstances that gave rise to the need for a declaration. We also consider that the advice to the Mayor about whether to issue a declaration was unnecessarily focused on whether emergency services required emergency powers. These findings should not be seen to denigrate the well-intentioned efforts of the Auckland emergency management staff, who were doing their best under difficult circumstances, as were the partner agencies and first responders, along with community leaders, volunteers and many ordinary Aucklanders who did extraordinary things to help their fellow citizens. They were the true heroes of this event. It will be vital going forward that leaders not only continue to prioritise improvements, but are also able and prepared to invest in these. The Auckland Emergency Management Team in particular needs support to embed the changes that will ensure improved future responses to unpredicted emergencies. This flood event has been an important wake-up call for Auckland Council and its civil defence and emergency management systems. Severe weather events are becoming more severe with climate change. Disasters often happen without warning. The review panel have made 17 recommendations that should be commenced as soon as possible. 2 as a matter of urgency. A separate review to examine Auckland Emergency Management's prevention, preparedness and plan, also known as readiness and reduction, for an emergency in Tāmaki Makaurau. The current review of the Auckland Civil Defence and Emergency Management Group plan to be finalised. Aucklanders deserve and should expect a plan for remedial action in order to ensure that these system deficiencies are not replicated and Auckland is better prepared for the next emergency event which could occur at any time. Now I'm open to questions.
Mike, could you sum up in plain English, what's the main message you want Aucklanders to know about how well this city responded to this weather event?
The purpose of our review was to understand how Auckland Emergency Management performed, take learnings and advise recommendations. There is definitely room for improvement and they are outlined fully in our report.
Can you sum it up for us, just in your own language?
It's all in the report.
Mr. Bush, at the bottom of page 44, you say whatever the state of key relationships. Can you be more specific about the problems that you found in key relationships?
I think it's really important to ensure that in crisis situations you have existing, robust, open communications with all parties, internal and external. I also use the word inclusive. Everyone needs to be involved early in a crisis. They all need to be briefed and communications need to be to the people involved, outward and upward, and particularly to the public.
One thing I find interesting is in the timeline in the report, and then you look at the timeline for Watercare, which is a lifeline utility. They were kind of onto it on a Tuesday, and at the start of the Friday, they were rostering emergency crews for the weekend. By lunchtime, they declared a level 1 incident. Were they not talking, or who was not talking to someone?
Again, as you've highlighted, and I talk about situational awareness, really important to have all of the facts before and during, and have them in a timely and accurate way. Without that, you cannot respond appropriately to a crisis of this magnitude and speed.
But did you find why Watercare were onto it and nobody else was?
I think we've addressed that in the report. I can't answer that question specifically.
Mr Bush, you
Sure.
have been critical of the council leadership for failing to understand its public-facing role. Where's the Mayor?
So we've also said that the Mayor should have been more demanding of information. As you will all be aware, to share information and keep the public informed via all channels of media, you need the information.
I'm asking you where he is today.
Oh, that's a question for you to put to the Mayor.
Did you expect him to be here?
No, this was very much myself presenting our report, the review team's report.
Your report used to show the Mayor and the Chief Executive on page 42 and 43 appear to be fairly on speaking terms. Is that as you understand it?
That's not a matter for me, but I do talk generally about communications, again, to ensure that they're constructive and open.
How would you describe the state of communications between the Mayor, Chief Executive and
Well, we've said in the report that there were not sufficient communications between all parties. And I will restate, because it's quite important, that information, timely and accurate, is key to this, to give the public reassurance that officials and elected officials and the professionals have this. You need timely information, and that information must be shared.
The Mayor said that he's wanted this report out for weeks. What's the delay around this been?
Twofold, really. The first is we parked our review for a week. The day we kicked off, we had the advice of Cyclone Gabriel. So we very much left all of the officials to do their business and prepare. And secondly was around accuracy. So we've had a draft report for some time, which we've been consulting with all parties, because it's really important. Even though I said this wasn't a forensic report, it's really important that we were accurate. So we wanted to consult with all parties, and that took some time.
Is there any sense of the parties wanting to delay the...
Not at all. No, none of this was deliberate. It was all in the name of accuracy.
Do you feel that there's a conflict of interest in the Mayor commissioning this report, given that he is such a big subject of it?
No, I don't. Reason being is that obviously the Mayor and everyone else are accountable. This is forward-looking, and it's about improving the performance, and I think that's the appropriate approach.
Mr Bush, in the documents that you reviewed, did it include the draft of the still unreleased Auditor General's report?
No, it did not.
Did you try to? Or?
We talked about that. We're not privy to that, and we're not permitted to be at this stage.
Did you knowledge of some of the issues here go back as far as 2016? So to what extent the problems that we experienced are a result of the current city leadership, and to what extent are they a result of previous leadership?
Yeah, we put the timeline in there to be specific, but we're not here to sheet blame in any direction. We're here to ensure that improvements are made. But we have spent some time talking about preparedness and planning, even though we were tasked with addressing the response. But in my view, my professional view, you cannot disconnect those two. So we did have to take a backward look to understand the journey that they've been on, to understand their planning, preparation and preparedness for an event such as this.
Mr Bush, you say that minutes really matters in terms of this response.
Yes.
How much sooner should the state of emergency have been declared?
Look, I'm not prepared to put an absolute time on that, but if we look at what was evolving, most of the damage had been done in those first few hours. But that wasn't all known to the officials who were managing this emergency crisis. That's why you have to have open communications with everyone who can provide you with information, so that you do have excellent situational awareness on which to base your decisions.
You said the AEM lacked situational awareness, another way of saying they didn't really know what was going on. Is there a structural reason that was the case?
Part of it is having expertise in responding to a very fast-moving incident. So this was probably the most fast-moving one they'd responded to. And you need experience and expertise in that, and to understand how these things evolve.
So it's about the right personnel.
You do need to bring people up to speed. We've talked about expertise and experience in our report, so yes, that's where we think investment should be made.
Is it fair to say across the board that out of their depth is a fair description for most?
They were very dedicated and conscientious people. At an event like this, you need to have previous experience and expertise in managing a fast-moving, serious or significant event such as this.
Did Jim Static engage lawyers to try to get stuff out of this report, or anyone at council?
Look, that would be a question for Mr. Stabak, and I'm not here to talk about...
You must know if council engaged lawyers to try to get stuff out of this report.
I'm not prepared to talk to that at this point. The reason being is we're not here to talk about personalities. We're here to talk about a system and what we believe are the improvements, the learnings and the recommendations to be better so that Auckland are fully equipped to respond to a similar situation in the future.
Why was no one from the
What kind of
Minister of
assurance can you
Emergency
give
Response, Karen McNulty's office, interviewed as part of this report?
We spoke to the most senior officials at NEMA in his office. This was a practical operational review.
The government doesn't play a role in the emergency response?
The information we had was sufficient to inform us. And talking to senior officials at NEMA, we deemed to be sufficient.
Mr. Bush, you've said that Auckland is expecting...
Can I share it around a little bit, do you mind?
Sorry for our lateness. What kind of assurance can you give South Aucklanders, especially people in Māngere, that they are a priority and that they will be included in future response planning?
As we looked at, one of the things we were concerned about was the speed of establishing what they call the CDCs, the coordination centres or evacuation centres. One was stood up in Māngere, thanks to the efforts of Councillor Philippina and other members of the community. We believe that could have been done in a more timely fashion, as could have other evacuation centres.
Why did MPP and Auckland Council set up two separate response centres? Why didn't they merge together? I think it left people confused about where to go for immediate support and long-term support.
Yeah, that is something that I think needs to be resolved for the future.
What relevant materials didn't you see as part of the rapid review that you would have liked to? You referenced that at the beginning.
Could you be a bit more specific?
I believe there was a line towards the start of your report that specified this as a rapid review, and you didn't see all the relevant materials that you would have liked to for perhaps a more comprehensive review. Could you be more specific on what aspects you didn't have access to?
Yes, as when I talked about preparation, preparedness, planning, we did look backwards to inform our view on the response. We could have spent months analysing previous documentation, minutes of meetings, etc. But of course this was a rapid review.
Was anything withheld from you?
Nothing. Nothing was withheld at all apart from the report we mentioned before, which no one is entitled to see at this point.
How significant were those initial texts and things like that said, look, there's a bit of flooding in Swanson, a bit of flooding here, but it's pockets effectively. I mean, was that like key false information?
Key, sorry?
Well, key false information that it was, pockets here, pockets there. Those initial texts.
Yes. I'll state again, and I apologise for being repetitive, but every piece of information is critical. That information should be analysed and appreciated, evaluated, understood, and that forms the basis of your planning and operations. So whether it was understated or overstated is something for the operational people to understand.
One of the big topics in coverage during that evening was the Elton John concert.
Yes.
Get to it or what to do.
Hmm.
Do you feel that, if you'll excuse the pun, swamped the other messaging that should have been given more prominence?
I'm sure it played a part. What we would have liked to have seen was more coordination between the parties.
Somebody should have been talking to Auckland Transport.
Well, everyone should be talking to each other.
On that
You
night,
said
people
that-
were still driving around at 7, 8 at night, driving into some pretty deep floodwaters. What kind of alerts or messaging should have been out by that point?
When we talked about an earlier declaration of a state of emergency, that's one of the reasons why we suggest it could have been made earlier and perhaps in daylight, so that it really underscores the significance of the event to the public that received that message and subsequent alerts. So it's to keep people safe.
Sorry. Are you going to play any further role in seeing what happens with these recommendations?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you want to?
That's something for the future. Hasn't been discussed.
How urgently, you've said it has to be done urgently, how urgently should these changes be addressed?
I believe they should start tomorrow. And I'm sure you'll hear from others who will tell you that they are underway already.
The review said that lifeline utilities such as Radio New Zealand could have been used or engaged in order to get messaging out more efficiently, but a coordinator couldn't be reached to set up those lifelines on the night. Just how important is it to always have a coordinator on call and able to reach at all times?
Look, it's critical to have good communications outwards to your lifeline people, but we appreciate the challenges of such a fast-moving event.
Were you surprised that so many of the problems have been known of for so long?
Look, I understand how difficult things can be to move, but our recommendation or our learnings were that they could have been actioned earlier.
No, I mean talking years, going back 7, 8 years, that the fundamental issues were known.
We believe they should have been acted on earlier.
Do you think, like the 4 people who lost their lives, that things could have been different if there was better preparation?
Look, only a coroner can talk to that subject, and I won't.
The council's proposing to increase its storm response budget by 20 million a year. From your early findings, can you see this going far enough, considering just how much work seems to need to be done?
That would be dangerous for me to venture into anything that requires infrastructure expertise. It's not my realm of experience.
You said in the report that some lessons you can see immediately being taken into account even for the response to Cyclone Gabrielle. Do you have any specifics on those lessons you saw being?
Yes, some of the disciplines around managing the coordinated incident management system were improved. They could have been enhanced on the night of the 27th, and I think learnings were taken from that as one example.
I guess inevitably people will look at your comment that most importantly the issue of leadership exposed by the crisis must be addressed, and people reading your report might think that's a direct reference to the current mayor. To what extent does this lay on his shoulders?
I think everyone will take a step back and look at their role. There are many people involved in leadership roles in Auckland emergency management, from the tactical, the operational, the strategic, and then the political.
Do you think people should lose their jobs?
Our report was very much not about that. It wasn't a human resource type investigation. We weren't here to hold people to account for their performance. We are here to identify learnings through our experience to make improvements for the future.
Do you know whether some of the people who were aware of the problems previously and did not act on them are still involved in the council
I
today?
couldn't answer that question.
Is there a kind of culture change on a larger scale needed within the council, do you think, considering these issues weren't followed up on from maybe as far back as 2016?
Yeah, I don't think I'm in a position to answer that question. I haven't been here long enough.
But yeah, is there any kind of change in direction that is needed in the leadership?
The only comment I make around culture is it's a different approach to managing a crisis to leading an organisation from day to day, month to month.
Has the cost of the review extended beyond the original 100 grand?
Yes, it has. I couldn't tell you the exact figure, but yes, because it took a little bit longer. No.
You said there's been under-preparedness since 2016. How long do you think it might actually take to get to the point where Auckland Council is prepared?
I understand that there will be real urgency. We have recommended absolute urgency to prepare themselves better for future emergencies, and we're very firm on that recommendation.
In your recommendations, have you made a point to highlight communities who already face systemic issues with housing, communities with overcrowded homes, with elderly people who live alone, with intergenerational families? These are the families that were affected in South Auckland. Have you included that in your recommendations?
That isn't our first recommendation. It's a very wide one, but it is to look at the preparedness and how the infrastructure would impact on those people.
Do you think you need to be more specific, considering that they already have needs prior to crisis that happened?
I think those needs and requirements would be addressed through that recommendation.
Do you really think so?
I do hope so. Well, hopefully I've exhausted your questions. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.